Where's the line? I'll ask you that. Where's the line of who's cartel and who's drug smugglers?
Well, I don't consider them to be Mexican drug cartels because cartels, that organization. Do they belong to the Sinaloa cartel? No. What belongs to the Sinaloa cartel is anyone that is distributing drugs for that organization. And that's why I would ask you, does it matter? To sometimes I'm like, do I make that argument? Does it even matter?
I think in a law enforcement capacity, it matters when it comes to prosecutions on how heavily they get charged. I think that's where, if I was a lawyer, I'd be like, hit them with it if they're cartel. You know what I mean? But in reality, if they're working with the cartel, doesn't necessarily mean they're cartel. I think we've definitely kind of blurred the line of what cartel really is. And, I mean, to be honest, I think Americans use the term cartel way too freely. You know what I mean? And I think it kind of, I wouldn't say discredits. I would just say that it kind of blurs the truth when you're not accurately defining who is who.
I think that's what's important to me, where the truth is being blurred and it's being confusing, because you state that in terms of prosecution, yeah, hit them with it. But in my involvement in drug trafficking since I was a kid, and all the prosecutions I've ever seen, there hasn't been a law that charges you with being part of a cartel. It's just, it would say something. And I don't think anyone's ever been prosecuted as of yet, other than the leaders of, for running a CCE. But there's no charge for that. It's just a description that is set to a judge or but maybe
I think
with the new law, it'd probably be important.
That's true.
Today with that new law, I think that drug traffickers, even in America, hopefully they're smart enough to understand that all those people claiming to be drug cartels, right? That they say all the time, I work for the cartel. If they're going to keep the same energy with these new FTO, right, designation and charges.
Yeah, that's true.
Because
I think of something that it's funny from a law enforcement position. I think the one thing that we could agree on, as in me and maybe the cartel, is that somebody who's just selling drugs wants to claim it. I would say, no, bro, I know the real side of it, and you're just a punk dealer. You know what I mean? In my head, as a law enforcement officer, I'd be like, I don't want to give that guy that kind of credit because he's full of shit. He's just a dealer. And then on the flip side, I imagine the cartel would be the same, saying like, yeah, he's nothing but a dealer. You know what I mean? So there's a similarity in thought process. Like, I don't want to give that guy that kind of credit because he ain't that big.
Okay. And that it's going to, let me just take that scenario. A few months ago and a few weeks ago, you've been hearing these memos or conversations saying that Mexican drug cartels have been given a green light to attack Border Patrol.
Correct.
They play a video of someone shooting. I didn't see the shooting, but they play the video of these drug cartel members. And I look at the video, I'm like, they're human trafficking. That's odd, because drug cartel members are usually trafficking drugs, and in this instance, they have they're human traffickers, and they have guns. And I said to myself, to me, they could just be how about some just criminals trying to make a buck, or who knows what they're doing? Because I will tell you this, me being involved at the highest levels, that's the number one rule. That's the unspoken rule, that you do not attack American law enforcement. They know what that means. It's bad for business. But now, are we going to take any little criminal, anyone at the border who commits a crime, and see a cartel member? Does he basically represent that? A couple of weeks ago, I see a report where someone goes to the border and asks someone in the street somewhere in Tijuana, what do they feel about the invasion of American military? and you have some young punk kid in Tijuana talking about, oh, we're ready for him, and they name him a
Yeah.
cartel member. And from my understanding, one of those individuals has gone missing.
Really?
Now, just think about that. You have someone representing a cartel or responding for a cartel, and the real people that are probably shitting on themselves somewhere, trying to hide, saying that's the last thing we need, because the reality is this, is that they know they don't stand a chance. They'll fight maybe, but they don't stand a chance. It's not going to be one like group trying to fight. It's going to be a bunch of people trying to survive. And it's gonna maybe it doesn't matter to law enforcement. Maybe it's not gonna matter to general public until it starts affecting them. And my
Yeah.
point being, some of the stuff that are being put into place, I think that could really affect or impact drug trafficking. If it was for me, I would tell you, look, we could make this simple. We could just stop, 60-70% of every semi going south to Mexico, x-ray it. Let's start taking the money, let's start taking the weapons, and let's just really make a difference. Let's invest a little bit more in the 100 miles of, every crossing border, and let's hire more interdiction officers. Let's focus on that instead of waiting for it to get to the inner city, or waiting to get to rural areas and being distributed, and hire more investigators to go after it. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I started to say, what if the plan were to work? What if this administration's plan of getting rid of these very large Mexican drug cartels and getting rid of their leadership? What if it works? What would happen then? Will fentanyl stop to exist?
I don't think so.
Giving that so much thought, I'm like, I know it wouldn't stop to exist, but I could give you an idea what would happen.
What would that be?
You would have all these Americans in these rural places in Virginia, in Maine, and West Virginia see opportunity to make money. And what's going to start happening then is you're going to have a bunch of Americans playing Breaking Bad and starting to produce.
I was just gonna say that sounds like Breaking Bad.
I will tell you is that most of these precursors, most of these chemicals are made into precursors to actually produce these synthetic drugs are legal. Then what's going to happen then? Who are we going to point the finger at? Just, it could matter in the, in terms of prosecution. Do a lot of major drug trafficking organizations exist all over the United States? Absolutely. But they're not going to be, drug cartels. And I'll share a story with you. I remember, sitting there with Mayo Zambala, and they were speaking about a certain individual. Like, I was just listening in, and they said, if they see him, pick him up, like kidnap him, pick him up and bring him. We want to speak to him. And in the middle of the conversation, they were basically saying that this individual was a very, large drug trafficker. And he was saying that he represented El Mayo's organization. And he's like, oh, yeah? So blame everything on me, huh? I'll take the blame for everyone. Like, and everyone's able to live their life and, be free. And I never thought about it that way. I was like, oh, wow, he makes a good point.
Yeah.
That a lot of these large drug trafficking organizations rather say it's the Sinaloa cartel, it's the Mayos, it's the Chapo. It's because it takes the weight off of them.
Yeah, that's a different point of view. And I think you're right. I think what in America we have designated too easily the term cartel to any individual who's smuggling drugs in the United States, who might be violent, who might fit those stereotypical kind of, the stereotypical terms, right? The different
profile,
things
right?
for Mexico. Yeah, exactly. And so I personally do get frustrated where everyone says, oh, they're cartel, because I do know, like, it's a lot more than that. You know what I mean? It's a lot more than that.